What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. We had a pretty rough week last weekend at UFC Vancouver when it comes to picks, but to be fair, a lot of underdogs did perform very well that I wasn't too high on myself, so that's something to note going forward for their fights. This weekend, let's look ahead. We have UFC 321 in Abu Dhabi, hence the desert in the background. So we have 321 headlined by Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane. Let's jump right into the picks and predictions for every single fight on this card. Let's get our get back for last week, and good luck to everyone this weekend. Kicking off the early prelims, we have Jaqueline Amorim versus Mizuki Inoue, and Inoue coming off a 2-year layoff. She's 15-6. Nothing really too notable of her career so far. The biggest thing about this fight is going to be Amorim's skills on the ground. She is a really, really high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner. She's coming off 4 straight finishes in the UFC. Her sole loss being to Sam Hughes, and that was earlier on in her career, and Sam Hughes is one of those trickier kind of opponents to beat off the bat. So coming off 4 straight finishes, that's something you don't normally see in these women's divisions, like pure finishers, but Amorim on the ground, very, very talented. I think she gets this fight there, and I think she finds a submission here against Inoue as well. She's minus 450, not too much to say about her, but I think she will be worth that price tag. I'm going to pick Amorim to get the sub. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we have Azat Maksum versus Mitch Raposo, and I'm going to go with Azat Maksum to win this one. I think he's just going to be a step ahead of Mitch Raposo throughout this entire fight. Azat Maksum, on a 2-fight skid, similar to Mitch Raposo, who's also on a 2-fight skid right now, but the quality of opposition that they're losing to is a little bit different. Azat Maksum lost to Charles Johnson and then Tagir Ulanbekov. Obviously, both of those really solid opponents. Tagir Ulanbekov coming out of Khabib's camp, and that was a really close fight, real close decision. Could have went either way, but I think Tagir did just a little bit more, ends up winning that on Maksum. And then prior to that, Charles Johnson, solid opponent to fight, not a bad loss whatsoever. We forget that Charles Johnson has a win over Joshua Van right now as well. And then Mitch Raposo, his two, split to Andre Lima, decent, but still not the same level of opponent that Maksum's lost to, and then split to Sumar Derji. Similarly, just not at the same level as the two opponents that Azat's losing to. And I just think that Azat, on the stand-up, he's going to be better in space. Raposo might have a little bit of an advantage if he can get into that dirty boxing range against Maksum here, but I think that for the most part, as they stay at distance, Maksum should have it, and I think on the ground, Maksum also has somewhat of an advantage here. He has that wrestling in his back pocket. I don't see him kind of imposing that on Mitch Raposo. I think that he's just going to want to strike at range, be able to kind of piece Raposo up. I think overall, Raposo is tough, though. This goes all 3 rounds, like I said, but Maksum should get done on the scorecards, and it should be, fairly kind of lightweight for Maksum to win this one, in my opinion. So give me Azat Maksum to win. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup on the card is Chris Barnett versus Hamdy Abdelwahab, and I'm going to go with Hamdy to win this one, but nobody should be betting on this fight. Hamdy at minus 400 is absolutely insane. He's 4-1 in his mixed martial arts career. Hasn't shown anything to kind of warrant a minus 400 price tag for him. And, Chris Barnett, he can do some cool stuff, can do some weird stuff, can randomly get a knockout here, that's for sure. So I'm not touching this fight whatsoever. I know Chris Barnett is a fan favorite, and to be honest, I'll probably be rooting for Barnett to win, but I think Hamdy is going to be slightly better. Barnett, coming off that injury, coming off that, first round loss to Kennedy and Nzechukwu, where obviously the injury played a big role in that. And then, being 39 years old, I'm just going to lean towards the younger fighter, the one that popped for steroids recently. So give me that guy. But at the same time, I'm probably going to be rooting for Barnett, but Hamdy will be the pick. Nobody should be betting this fight. Like I said, let's move on to the next fight. All right, up next, we have Jose Delgado versus Nathaniel Wood, and my pick is going to be Jose Delgado to find the finish on Nathaniel Wood this weekend. Now, Delgado is in for a real fight. Nathaniel Wood is a solid mixed martial artist. He's good on the ground. He's good standing up. He has a very well-rounded skill set, and is a real gatekeeper to the absolute elites in the division. So Delgado is going to have his hands full with Nathaniel Wood, but I think that Delgado's ceiling is much higher. He's an absolute finisher. His finish on Haider Amil in the first round, who prior to that fight, Amil was, really a bit of a marauder, and I think that he had a good chin, but Delgado was able to get him out of there pretty quick. And I think that in this fight, unless Nathaniel Wood can just completely wrestle Jose Delgado the entire time, which Delgado is good on the ground in his own right, and on top of that, Wood is not some type of wet blanket wrestler to kind of come in and do that. So I just think that Delgado's eventually going to kind of pull away. His striking is very dynamic. He's got real power. I think he finds a finish on Nathaniel Wood this week, and I think he kind of puts himself in the upper echelon of prospects in the featherweight division. That's where I think he's headed. I got Delgado by finish. I'm happy betting this line too. I think that it's a little bit of, are you going to ride the hype chain or not? But I believe in the hype train for Jose Delgado. Let's move on to the next matchup. All right, up the card, we have Valter Walker versus Louie Sutherland, and I'm going to go with Valter Walker to win this one. I think that, Louie Sutherland, he does look like kind of a beast, and I think that over 3 rounds, this guy is definitely not holding up a good gas tank, especially not in the UFC. Valter Walker is going to get a takedown here, and I think he's going to find a submission. I think that Valter Walker, with a lot of these heavyweights, they can't keep up with him on the ground, especially not with his grappling. Obviously, he is on that 3 heel hook submission streak, which is absolutely insane. I don't know if he gets a heel hook. I don't know what the submission is going to be. Maybe you do bet Valter Walker by heel hook just for the laughs, but Valter Walker should be able to get Louie Sutherland to the ground here. I think that especially over 3 rounds, someone like Sutherland is just not going to be able to kind of keep up with Valter Walker. Valter Walker is actually in real good shape for a heavyweight. His first fight in the UFC, he was a little bit of a blob against Lucas Bresky, and even that fight, he could have won that decision. I think that could have went either way. He ended up losing that decision. That was his debut, and you can see a real shift in his physique from that fight to the Junior Tafa fight. And since he switched physiques, he's just been heel hooking everybody. So Valter Walker is, a special heavyweight when it comes to the grappling. I think he can get this fight to the ground, and I think that even if this fight does extend a bit, as this fight goes on, Louie Sutherland is going to fade a lot harder than Valter Walker. So give me Walker to get this done. I think he does find the submission. Let's move on to the next matchup. All right, up the card, we have Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady versus Matheus Camilo, and I really like Camilo as a fighter. I'm going to go with Matheus Camilo to win this one. I think that, he is 24 years old, very young, very fresh fighter, and I think that there is a lot of improvement to be made on his game from a fight-to-fight basis. He did lose his UFC debut to Gabe Green, but that being said, he was kind of dominating that fight, beat him in round 1, definitely had a solid round 2, had Gabe Green locked up in a triangle, should have got Gabe Green out of there in that situation, didn't end up getting the finish, and then kind of adrenaline dumped, gave up his back, and just quit on the fight at that point because he was probably just super gassed out. That's like a mistake you make early on in your career. And I actually picked Gabe Green to beat him there in that fight. Did kind of get dominated, but then ended up pulling it off. I got a little bit lucky, but I think Camilo is actually pretty good of a fighter. I think that's like the bomb. You make that mistake in your career, and now you learn from it. I think he's come back stronger, come back harder than that. Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady, I think, he is tough. He's a decent fighter. He's got some good power to him too. But I think that if he doesn't find that knockout, Camilo will be, faster. He's younger. He's going to be sharper. He's good on the feet and on the ground. But for the most part, I don't think Al-Selwady is just going to dominate Camilo on the ground. I think on the feet, like I said, Camilo will be one step ahead. So give me Matheus Camilo here. Hopefully he doesn't get knocked out. Al-Selwady can, be tough and throw some big bombs. But outside of that, I think that this fight goes all the way. It's a gritty one, but I think Camilo, the younger fighter, comes in and, does pretty well here. So give me Matheus Camilo. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup, we got Mateusz Rebecki versus Ludovic Klein. And this might be the contrarian opinion to this fight, but give me Mateusz Rebecki to beat Ludovic Klein. Now, I know this is like a little bit of a weird spot to pick, but Ludovic Klein, he's a solid striker, but you can exploit his game on the ground a little bit. I think that Rebecki does have the tools to potentially exploit Klein on the ground here. And then on top of that, dude, Rebecki is an absolute gamer. This guy will fight for your money, and that's not someone that you really want to be betting against. That's for sure. He's coming off that absolute monster war of a loss to Chris Duncan where, maybe you could have given him the fight, but I think, Chris Duncan did do a little bit more prior to that. Gets that split decision win in Abu Dhabi 1 year ago. Same thing, Abu Dhabi pay-per-view card of 2024, where he beat Miktabek Oralbai, and that was an absolutely insane war. He's coming off 2 wars, and I think that he's going to want to create another war here against Ludovic Klein. And my pick really just kind of lies on the fact that I don't know if Ludovic Klein is built for that. If Mateusz Rebecki goes into full war mode, I don't know if Klein is built for that. I think that Rebecki can land something big. To be honest, I think Rebecki just dogs Ludovic Klein here and finishes him. I know Klein is a more skilled fighter. He's like the slicker striker, and he has good enough grappling and takedown defense to not just be wet blanketed by someone like Rebecki. I think Rebecki can mix in takedowns here, shoot here and there, do some work on the ground with Ludovic Klein, but I think for the most part, on the feet, Klein could be slicker, but I think there's going to be a point in this fight where Rebecki says, fuck that, create a complete war, and my pick is that Klein is just not built for that life. So give me Mateusz Rebecki to win this one. A little bit of a, weird pick here, but I got a feeling that Rebecki has it. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving up the card, we have Ikram Aliskerov versus Jun Young Park, and I'm going to go with Ikram Aliskerov to beat Jun Young Park this weekend. I think that Ikram Aliskerov is the better fighter on the ground here. I also think that Ikram Aliskerov is much more of a finishing threat. These guys have a common opponent in Andre Muniz, and Ikram Aliskerov kind of disposes of Andre Muniz early in that fight. And then, Jun Young Park on the other side goes to a split decision loss against Andre Muniz. Obviously, MMA math doesn't work, but something to note as a common opponent between the two to kind of gauge where they're at. Ikram Aliskerov has 2 losses, and they're to Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev. I think that's pretty okay to lose to those type of guys. They're elite fighters. Jun Young Park, on the other hand, he is good. He is tough, but I think overall, he's not really putting people away. Ikram Aliskerov has been finished in both of his losses, and I just think that he's not submitting Aliskerov, and I don't think he's knocking him out either. If he had more knockout power, I think there would be more of a threat on the Jun Young Park side, but I think Aliskerov is actually the more prominent finisher on the feet as well here, and I think that he does potentially find a finish on Jun Young Park, but overall, I think Aliskerov should be one step ahead, should kind of have this fight covered wherever it goes for the most part. Give me Ikram Aliskerov, especially, the Russian fighter in Abu Dhabi normally does play out that way. I got Aliskerov. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup on the card, we got Nasrat Haqparast versus Keelan Salkild, and I'm going to go ahead and pick Nasrat Haqparast. But that being said, this is a very close scrap between these two. Haqparast is coming off that split decision win, which was an absolute war against Esteban Ribovics, and then prior to that, also that split decision win against Jared Gordon. So, a couple close decisions in this Haqparast win streak that he's chaining together, but he's just far more experienced in the UFC than Keelan Salkild. His volume on the feet is just absolutely amazing. Beating someone like Ribovics by decision in just a pure striking match is something that I find fairly impressive. Haqparast, like I said, will throw a shit ton at Salkild, and unless Salkild somehow comes out here and wet blankets Haqparast, I think it's going to be hard for him to kind of keep up with Haqparast's pace throughout this fight. So I like the experience. I like the pace. I do think that this fight does go all 3 rounds. I don't see any crazy finish. Neither of these guys kind of come off to me as a crazy finisher in their own right. Obviously, Salkild had that early knockout of Anshul Jubli, but that doesn't really tell me much. So I think this fight goes all the way, but I got Haqparast winning it on the cards. Maybe another close decision like he's kind of been in the past, but I think that should be the right side. I think there's some value in this betting line too. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving up the card, we have Alexander Rakic versus Azamat Murzakanov, and I'm going to go ahead and pick Azamat Murzakanov to win this one, but this is a very, very close scrap, and depending on how you view Alexander Rakic coming into this fight will definitely kind of dictate which side of this fight you're going to want to be on. A couple narratives surrounding Rakic. One is that, he's on a 3-fight skid, but to the best of the best, which is true. He lost to Jan, then Yuri, then Ankalaev. Obviously, these are the elites of the light heavyweight division. And on top of that, he was able to secure a round in each of those fights, coming off a close scrap to Ankalaev. Now, the other way to look at it is that he hasn't won a fight in over 4 years. His last one was to Thiago Santos in 2021. Prior to that, beat Anthony Smith. Lost a split decision to Volkan Ozdemir. Now we're going all the way back to 2019. So, it's been a while since Rakic has gone in the octagon and gotten his hand raised. He still does look pretty solid. Like I said, against Ankalaev, close fight. Won the first round, lost 2 and 3. But, none of the rounds were like Ankalaev just running away with it. And then now looking into this fight against Azamat, the thing here is that Rakic is 6'4" and Azamat's 5'10". Rakic has a 78-inch reach. Azamat has a 71.5-inch reach. So there are some physical characteristics that go towards Rakic here as well. But that being said, Azamat Murzakanov is a southpaw fighter. He has great counter-striking. Rakic, the big thing in that Ankalaev fight was Ankalaev was able to find a home for his left hand from that southpaw stance on Rakic. And Murzakanov is going to have a very similar approach, especially with the counter-punching. Now, can Murzakanov close the distance on Rakic, and can he do it consistently, over 3 rounds? Does he have to knock him out? Maybe it's like 1 or 2 blitzes that he's going to get an opportunity to land something big. How do you see this fight playing out? There's a lot of questions surrounding this, which is why I think this is a very close scrap. I'm going to lean Murzakanov. He is the undefeated Russian in Abu Dhabi. It makes a little bit more sense to me. He does have, the big left hand. That is his knockout shot. He is a finisher, much more of a finisher than Alexander Rakic. And I just think that, he does find a home for that left hand in this fight, and I think he does put Rakic away. But I think Murzakanov is going to have to win this one by knockout. By decision is going to be tough. Maybe there's a world where, he gets a couple big moments and that overdoes the volume of leg kicks and jabs he's going to catch from Rakic. But I think by decision is a tougher sell for the Murzakanov side. So if you think this fight goes all the way, I would be on the Rakic side. But I think that, Murzakanov will eat a little bit, realize that, it's either he stays on the outside and loses this fight, or he does a couple big blitzes and, finds a home for that left hand. And I think that left hand does find a home. And I think Rakic's chin can be checked. So I'm going to go with Murzakanov, but this is a very close one. I think that it could go either way. Pretty sketchy one. I would potentially stay away from it unless you're playing some random parlays and kind of throwing one of these guys in there to really boost the odds. So give me Murzakanov. Like I said, not super confident. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving up the card, we have Alexander Volkov versus Jailton Almeida. And this is another tough fight to predict because I can see a world where Volkov's takedown defense holds up against Almeida this weekend. He's looking sharper with his grappling defensively, especially as of late. He's also looked like he's added a little bit of muscle to his frame, maybe 15 pounds of muscle to his frame as of late, mitigating the ability to just kind of get easy takedowns on him. Now, Jailton Almeida on the other side, I can see his dominant wrestling continue to be dominant here against Volkov, continue to kind of be able to get him down, get him up against the fence, as Volkov is using the fence to get up, get some hooks in, get that rear naked choke done. So I do think that, Jailton Almeida can still work his dominant wrestling. And that's the side I'm going to lean towards just because, while Volkov has proven to just sharpen up his takedown defense and things like that, a level of wrestling that Jailton Almeida brings, especially in this heavyweight division, is just different than what Volkov has seen. So I find it really hard to compare. Jailton Almeida is a real beast. And to be honest, the fight that I look towards to kind of view this fight is Jailton Almeida's loss to Curtis Blaydes. Now, Curtis Blaydes, obviously a great wrestler in his own right, and Almeida was kind of manhandling Curtis Blaydes in that first round, goes into the second round, does eat, I think it looked like a short uppercut when he went in for that takedown, eats that short uppercut, goes a little bit limp, holds on to the legs. I do think he was hurt before the hammer fists, at least like I watched it back in slow motion, it seemed like that landed, and then, eats the hammer fist, gets put away. I just don't think Volkov is going to be able to stick and move on Almeida, especially for the entire 3 rounds. So I think Almeida eventually does get the wrestling going, but I do see a world where, Volkov's takedown defense does look really good, and then Almeida starts getting desperate. The shots are a lot more telegraphed, a lot easier for Volkov to defend, and then Volkov starts to run away with it. So, I wouldn't be super surprised if that happens, but as a pick, I still think that Almeida's wrestling is something that we haven't seen Volkov be able to defend against, or to be fair, anyone really be able to defend against. So give me Jailton Almeida. Let's move on to the next matchup. Moving up the card, we got Umar Nurmagomedov versus Mario Batista, and everybody and their mother is going to be hammering Umar this weekend, including myself. Pause. But I do think that, Umar does not lose in this spot back-to-back, coming off of that loss to Merab, where he did give Merab his toughest title defense. And, he almost won that fight, went into round 3 up 2-0 on Merab, and that's just a fact on the scorecards. On 2 scorecards, he was up 2-0 going into that third round. And I just think that, he did gas out, and obviously kudos to Merab. And if they fight again, I'm not saying like Umar's going to win in a rematch or anything like that. Merab is obviously looking extremely dominant, but Umar is clearly at that level of mixed martial artist to go into a Merab fight and kind of be very, very competitive with someone who's almost the GOAT of the division. So that's the caliber we're getting with Umar. On the other side with Mario Batista, we're getting someone that obviously disposes of Patchy Mix, but who the hell is Patchy Mix? We know exactly who Patchy Mix is now, and he's absolute dog shit. And then, the Jose Aldo split decision, he lost that fight. Just genuinely, based off damage-based scoring, he lost that fight. He lost that third round. Has a really solid fight against Ricky Simone, actually. And I just think that Mario Batista, not on that level. The close fights Mario Batista is just fights that Umar is not going to even keep competitive. He's just going to absolutely dominate. The one thing, though, is that Batista is very tough. I think his survivability is really good. So I think he's going to make Umar fight all 15 minutes here, actually earn that paycheck, go all 3 rounds. And I don't see Umar as this crazy finisher whatsoever. But Umar is going to, be able to have clean striking, probably better striking from distance on Mario Batista. And if Mario Batista does try to close the gap on Umar here, Umar is going to be able to out-wrestle Mario Batista. So I think Umar has it everywhere. He's going to stay at range. When the gap closes, he's going to be able to kind of clinch up, shoot, wrestle. And Mario's not going to want much of that. So give me Umar wherever it goes. the odds kind of also reflect this, but I do think he's safe. I've been kind of parlaying him since these markets opened where he was minus 300. So I have a bunch of money on Umar, and I'm going to continue to add probably. So give me Umar. Let's move on to the co-main event. Moving into the co-main event, we got Virna Jandiroba versus Mackenzie Dern for probably the least hyped title fight of all time. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people tuning into this that don't even know that this is a title fight. But, the belt is vacant at 115 pounds in the women's division. And it's because Weili Zhang is moving up for that champ status. And, Weili deserves it. Weili's a sick fighter, but she's left this mess in this division, which is Virna Jandiroba versus Mackenzie Dern for a belt. And, I'm going to go with Virna Jandiroba, man. This is the rematch. Mackenzie Dern and Virna have fought, and Dern did win that first fight, and that was a few years ago. But now, Virna's coming into this with far more momentum. She's looking far better. And then Mackenzie Dern, I just feel like since that first fight, hasn't evolved as much as a Virna Jandiroba has. She's got finished by Jessica Andrade, decision loss to Amanda Lemos, and these are not the best looking ones. We know Amanda Lemos, for example, she can be taken down, can be controlled. Mackenzie Dern wasn't able to get the grappling going in that one. I just think that Virna Jandiroba in this fight, she'll probably just win the positional battle. Dern probably has better submissions, but I think overall a lot of this fight plays out on the mat. Dern wants to grapple, Jandiroba wants to grapple, and Dern is a better striker, so maybe if she's smart, she won't grapple, but Dern is more of that jiu-jitsu type of practitioner. So if Jandiroba wants to take the grappling to her, Dern's going to do what's kind of natural to her. And for these jiu-jitsu practitioners, accepting position is sometimes natural. So I think that Jandiroba is going to play that positional battle, win that positional battle, and probably win this fight. She's a dog, and she's moving to a bigger and bigger dog, and I find it pretty interesting. I like her momentum coming into this, so give me Virna. I don't understand how this is the title fight, but it is what it is. We love some women's MMA, so Virna to win. Let's move on to the main event. Moving on to the main event for UFC 321, we have Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. And I'm going with Tom Aspinall to win this one. I think that's no surprise. Anybody who is picking Cyril Gane is just trying to be a contrarian for no reason whatsoever. You got no reason to pick Cyril Gane against Tom Aspinall here. What is Cyril Gane going to do? Obviously, Cyril Gane is pretty decent heavyweight fighter, but he's got that loss to John Jones, obviously, where John Jones just kind of ran him down, choked him out. Then he beats Sergey Spivak. Then he loses to Volkov, wins that actual split decision on paper, but he lost to Volkov completely. And obviously, Tom Aspinall, we know Tom Aspinall is just walking through everyone, does have that loss to Curtis Blades via injury, but outside of that, absolutely demolishing everyone. And I think that, Aspinall is a super smart fighter. Aspinall doesn't seem like the fighter to take additional damage when not needed. Not like Cyril Gane is really just sleeping people. But I think Aspinall has the hand speed. If he punches Cyril Gane, hits him with something real hard, and Gane goes down, I think that, he's going to go for a club and sub on the Aspinall side. And I think that if, Aspinall doesn't land anything big early, he's just going to bulldoze Gane to the ground and sub him anyway. So I think that Aspinall by sub early is what I think happens here. Overall, though, he could knock him out, but I just think that he's just going to kind of bulldoze him and submit him. I think that's what happens. Cyril Gane, busted prospect, busted future champion. That's not happening. Lost to Ngannou, lost to Jones. Now he's losing to Aspinall, and hopefully he doesn't get another title shot for quite a while. So give me Tom Aspinall. If Tom Aspinall loses, man, that's probably the worst thing for the UFC right now. So if you're a John Jones fan, I wouldn't hold your breath. Aspinall's going to win this one, and that does it for all the picks and predictions for UFC 321. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you did like the video, hit a like, subscribe, share it to your friends. It does help the algorithm a lot, helps out the channel. I will be doing these every single week, and on top of that, like I said, would love to do some commentary style UFC content to just kind of give you guys my opinions on what's happening within the promotion. If you guys have any certain topics, any things that you have strong opinions on that you want me to talk about, or you kind of want to voice your own opinions about, leave that in the comments as well. But like I said, if you like the predictions, like the video, and good luck to everyone on their bets for UFC 321. I will see you guys next week.